helping people cope with and overcome life's challenges. This is Life Transformations with Michael Hart, certified Christian counselor and director of Ottawa's ElimCounselling Services.
Hi, this is Michael Hart of ElimCounselling Services, and I want to thank you for joining us today on this episode of the Life Transformation Radio Show. As usual, we have another interesting show lined up for you today. Today's show is entitled Overcoming the Imposter Syndrome. Overcoming the Imposter Syndrome. Stay tuned, it's going to be a good one. But before we get into the show today, let me remind the listeners, if you're listening to us for the first time, to tell you a little bit about Elim Counseling Services, and for listeners who have been listening before, maybe this will serve as a reminder. Elim is a professional counseling organization that provides professional counseling from a Christian perspective for a wide range of issues. We have male and female counselors available on staff, and we also are able to offer reimbursable insurance receipts, so that if you are covered on a benefit plan, you can have your payments that you make to us reimbursed. Elim operates from a Christian perspective, so unlike other centers who offer psychotherapy, our counselors are also believers, and as such they will approach your counseling from a Christian perspective. If you are not familiar with us and know how to get all of us, the number is 613-699-1677. Again, it's 613-699-1677. You can also visit our website at ElimCounselingMinistry.com. Elim is spelled E-L-I-M, counseling with 2 L's, ministry.com. And if you have missed the past episodes of this broadcast, you can access the shows on our website by just going to our website and clicking on the radio show section of the website. We have all the podcasts from past shows that are recorded there. With me in studio today, as usual, is Melissa Wagot. Welcome, Melissa.
Good to see you again, Michael. It's always great to join you.
Absolutely. And same here. And today, our show today is really a very important one. It's an issue that is not talked about a lot. But this whole area of feeling like an imposter, feeling like you're in a position, maybe a position that God has called you to if you're a believer, but feeling, I don't quite belong here. It just doesn't fit. I don't feel as if I deserve to be here, or I am not capable of doing this work, even though you might have all the training that is needed to perform that job.
And being on pins and needles, just waiting for the shoe to drop and someone to find out who you really are, so to speak, and that it's all been a front and a good facade. So yes, I know I'm excited to learn about this, because we were joking before, this is something I've experienced in my own life. Something
I came across in my studies when we were just about to graduate as counselors. One of my classmates came to me, and she had this look of panic on her face, and I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "Well, I can't believe that I am going to be out there counseling people and telling people about how to overcome their problems." But she had all the qualifications. As a matter of fact, she was one of the top students in the class, and she just couldn't see herself as being worthy of being a psychotherapist and counseling others, despite the fact that she was as qualified as any of the other of us.
So if you're identifying with any of these examples Michael and I are giving, stay tuned, because this show's for you. We're going to delve into this topic and explore about what it is, what causes it, and how to overcome it. But before we get into it, I think there was an upcoming event in the community you wanted to highlight it, for the listeners, that's happening in the Cornwall area on June the 30th, looking at anxiety and depression.
Absolutely. We have been getting a lot of calls from the pastors in that area asking us to do a seminar on anxiety and depression. So we'll be having a seminar on Thursday evening of June the 30th, and it will be about a 2-hour seminar from 7 to 9 p.m. And the seminar will be focusing on how to overcome depression, how to overcome anxiety, and we'll be talking about some new cutting-edge research that pertains to this whole area of anxiety and depression. So people who come out to this seminar will be getting tools, but as usual, we'll also be approaching the subject from a Christian perspective. So we will be touching on some biblical areas and biblical principles that can help people overcome their struggle with anxiety and depression.
So who should attend this seminar? Is it people suffering from anxiety or depression, or people who are working with those individuals, or both?
I would say both, because as I said, we're going to be giving tools that can be helpful if you're suffering from depression or anxiety. And, we're also those same tools can be used by others who are in a position of care and caring for others or helping others. Maybe it's even for parents as well who may have children who are struggling with anxiety and depression. These tools can be very helpful in helping you to know how to identify the symptoms and also what to do in cases if you have a family member that is struggling with anxiety and depression.
And so if people want to attend, do they need to sign up beforehand? And if so, how do they go about getting on the list?
To sign up, you can call 613-699-1677 and just say that you are calling to register for the workshop, for the seminar in the anxiety and depression seminar in Cornwall, and we will have you on the list. As usual, seating is very limited, and from my experience, seminars like this can fill up very quickly.
Mm-hmm. And so Cornwall is a pretty big city. Where exactly in Cornwall? As you mentioned, it's not everywhere in Cornwall, I'm assuming, or not that omnipotent or anything like that. So whereabouts in Cornwall is this seminar being held?
The conference in the seminar in Cornwall will be held at the Harvest Christian Fellowship. And this is a church. I don't have the exact location off the top of my head. I'll give that in another show. But if you type in Harvest Christian Fellowship in Google, the address will come up, but it's not hard to find.
Very good. Where would we be without Google? No imposter phenomenon for Google there. So really exciting event coming up. So we encourage you to take advantage if you have anxiety or depression yourself, or you're working with people who may be exhibiting this, whether it's in your professional work or within your family. Take advantage, give us a call, and get your name on the list for this seminar. It's going to be a good one as always. So today, as we've alluded to, we're going to be talking about imposter phenomenon, and for full transparency, this is something that as I said, I was joking with Michael earlier off the top, I've experienced myself. So I'm looking for some personal tips here, Michael, so no pressure.
This is especially for you, Melissa.
It is.
Like everything
it is.
Here, I'll give you the bill at the end.
It's really, really exciting for me. But for other people who are listening, this may be a concept that they've never heard about before. So I was just wondering if you can describe a little bit what is imposter syndrome, and as we often talk about, we often look to the Bible as biblical examples. So if there's reflections of what this looks like from a biblical perspective, if you can give the listeners a little bit of insight there, I think it'd be really helpful to set the stage. What does an person suffering from imposter syndrome look like?
I think a good example of someone who may have had the imposter syndrome would be King Saul, or Saul before he became king. And it is evidenced by the fact as found in 1 Samuel chapter 10 and verse 21 that when he was supposed to be inaugurated as king, that they couldn't find him. So when Samuel called all the people before him, and Samuel was about to present the king to the nation, Saul was nowhere to be found. And we are told in 1 Samuel 10 that he was actually hiding among the baggage. So there is something in how he saw himself, his self-concept, that made him feel that he just couldn't fit into that role as being a king. And so I think that's a very good example. People who have the imposter syndrome, despite the fact that they have all the qualifications, despite the fact that they are very good at what they do, they still feel as if they're a fraud. So a very common element of people who have this imposter syndrome is that they feel that they're a fraud in their field. As I said, highly competent, but still having this internal dialogue that accuse them of being a fraud.
And so are there factors that have been identified through working with people or through research that people who suffer from imposter syndrome often exhibit or have as part of their life?
Imposter syndrome, I think, is caused by a difference between the person's internal self-image and the objective task that they're qualified to do. So if you think about a sort of spectrum where on the left you have the person's self-image and on the right you have their qualifications or their training, there is a great gap in between the self-concept and the objective qualifications or the role that this person is playing. And so because of that gap, they might be highly qualified on one hand, but on the other side, because of the negative self-image, there is an accusation, there's a self-dialogue that is constantly at war with the objective state, that the objective qualifications that the person have, that is saying, yes, you might be a doctor, you might be trained in doing surgery, but you are not really as qualified. What are you doing in this operating theater with this knife in your hand? Or what are you doing on the pulpit as a pastor? If people really know who you are, they would know that you're a fraud. And I see people all the time in my practice who are playing these roles of professional, who are playing these roles of in which they're qualified for, but they're saying, I still feel as if I am a fraud. And when you ask about the psychological reasons behind it, there is something that happened in childhood that is making that person feel that they are not deserving of that position that they're in, or that they shouldn't be in that position that they're in. If you've just joined us, you're listening to the Life Transformation Radio broadcast. This is your host, Michael Hart of ElimCounselling Services, and with me in studio today is Melissa Wagon. You can contact us by calling 613-699-1677 if you would like to ask a question, if you'd like to get help for yourself if you've heard this show or you're hearing this show and you think, yes, this is something I need to deal with, give us a call at 613-699-1677.
So you'd mentioned there that people experiencing this phenomenon of imposter syndrome often have this internal dialogue that's going on. What kind of things are they saying to themselves that's not being reflected in the reality? As you say, these are qualified individuals in many respects, but they still have this feeling of lack of qualification.
Well, one of the very common things that happen in this dialogue that is going on, they are feeling that they are going to be busted sooner or later. Someone is going to find out that I am a fraud, or something is going to happen that will let people know that I don't measure up. And so that kind of dialogue creates a lot of anxiety. So they're working in this profession that they're in, and instead of being focused on the job, they're more focused on the fact that they're going to be discovered one day. So they're going to be found out one day for being a fraud. So the dialogue in their head is going, if people only knew who you were and that you're a fraud, they would not be coming to see you. Or if people knew who you were, then they would take you out of this job right away. And it's an irrational thought, because these people, as I said, they are usually very qualified, but there is something that happened in their childhood that is making them feel that they should not be in that position of authority that they're in.
Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if you also notice with some of those irrational thoughts, sort of that misattribution for the reasons for their success. Though I may have graduated top of my class, or I've got every piece of paper reflecting a competent individual, the only reason I got that was dumb luck.
Right.
Or
right.
I was suave, or I was quote unquote smart.
Right.
So again, I could mislead someone into giving me these things that, again, I didn't deserve.
Yes, and one of the ones I commonly hear is, yes, I got it, but I had to work twice as hard as other people, right? I the only reason that I graduated to the top of the class, or that I made it through this program, is that I worked harder than everyone else. But the reality is that everyone works hard to get the degree, to get the doctorate or the master's that you have, or whatever it is that your profession calls for qualification. But because of the tension between their self-belief, the image of themselves, the negative self-image, and the objective task that they're qualified to do, they have to find a way to justify that they're not qualified. And it's not it's not rational. Often these reasons are irrational reasons. So one of the common ones is that I had to work harder. Another common thing that I hear is, yes, even though I graduated, I did really badly on one of my papers. So I have this paper that I really failed, and I don't deserve to be here as a result of that. But when you examine further, what you often find in people who feel that they're a fraud because they didn't do well on one subject in their entire curriculum of 7 or 8 years is that they had done that paper over and they got a passing grade, but just the fact that they fail it, they go back to that because the negative self-image is trying to find anything that it can hook onto as proof that you shouldn't be here. So you may have passed 100 subjects or 100 courses to get the qualification that you have, but there is just this one that you didn't do good on. And instead of your mind looking at the fact that I did 99 courses and got good grades, the mind goes to that one that you had trouble with and say, because of that one, I don't deserve to be here. So when we have this image in scripture of King Saul hiding among the baggage and not wanting to take his position as king, even though the Bible told us that as a man, he looked like the most fitting for the part. He was head and shoulders among the others, we are told. Yes, but what we didn't see and what was not showing in that picture of this tall, strong man that looked like a mighty warrior is that there was a hurting child somewhere in there that is saying, you can't do this. You don't fit. The negative self-image must have been very strong for King Saul.
So we've talked a little bit about some of the causes of imposter syndrome and some personal factors that may be influencing someone to be predisposed to this. What kind of effects does this have on someone's life, probably personally as well as professionally?
So let's start with professionally first. If you can just think of this image of a person who feel that they don't fit in and they're going to be busted, someone is going to discover sooner or later that they shouldn't really be in that position, even though that they're qualified. One of the things that happen with their professional life is that they can't enjoy the work that they do. So work is not fulfilling. Work is very stressful. So the offshoot of that is because they're going to be busted and found out, they tend to be overly meticulous.
Got to be hypervigilant.
Hypervigilant in making sure that everything is done exactly as the book says. And so as a result of that, they lose creativity. They lose this idea to this ability to adapt to changes in their work situation, and they're stuck. They can't really fulfill their full potential because they're constantly in this, I like the word used, hypervigilance. They're in this state of hypervigilance all the time, and so they're stuck. They can't really move, and they can't grow.
And I'm wondering too if there's like self-limiting that comes from that in terms of limiting your potential. You may not try for that job because even though everything you're reading in that job description supports you being qualified, again, you don't feel that you're worthy of that.
Absolutely. So if you don't think you're worthy of the position that you're in, even though you're highly qualified, when something opens up for you to go to a higher position, maybe to take the position of management or to lead an entire division of your company, those self-limiting beliefs are going to say, "Who you don't deserve. You can't do that."
I'm picturing someone even reluctant to. You do get that dream job, right? And you're like, "This is where I'm supposed to be." Having even a struggle writing your qualifications at the end or writing your title, feeling like you can't even own it, because again, you're not supposed to be there.
Yes.
And someone's just going to find out and change their mind and undo the stupid mistake that they made, right?
So you had asked also about some of the personal ramifications of being like that. People who are in this position where they feel like an imposter, they will be very stressed even off the job. So their personal life is likely to take a hit because of that same hypervigilance, that sense that they have to be very meticulous. So even when they're at home and they have this off time where they're supposed to be relaxing and enjoying themselves, they're ruminating in their minds. I wonder if that email that I sent yesterday at 3 a.m. in the morning, they will wake up out of their sleep and be thinking about an email that was sent in the daytime and wondering if did I say the right thing? I wonder if I used the right word. I wonder if maybe I should have said that, or maybe I should have omitted something. And a lot of time the things that they're really worrying about are not things that make any difference. So, I have sometimes even lawyers that come to see me who are in this case, in this, are going through this imposter syndrome, and they will be ruminating over something that they sent out to a client the day before and feeling as if they're putting the case in jeopardy or they didn't do due diligence. But in truth and in fact, when we go through this together and we look at it rationally, they said, yes, it's not really a big deal. This is something that is very common in our profession. But because of that negative self-concept, the imposter syndrome, they are really hypervigilant and really feeling as if looking for reasons to feel as if they're making mistakes.
And I'm wondering, do you ever see as well people, again, creeping into the personal life to kind of compensate for your inferiority or lack of qualification, those irrational fears, spending a lot of personal time working on work or trying to study more or do more or get more knowledge because, again, I'm not qualified and I don't have enough. So you're constantly in this state of self-preservation and protection. Do you see that as well?
Absolutely. So always striving to become better qualified because you don't think that you're qualified enough. So, but even with more qualification, the situation persists because it's not a rational fear. It's not a rational feeling. So no amount of qualification is ever going to let that person feel that they're qualified enough. So one person that went through this went on and didn't feel qualified in the job, so she did a master's, where everyone else in her division just had like a bachelor degree, and she still felt as if she was an imposter. So she went on and did a doctorate over many years, and even with the doctorate, she still felt that she was an imposter in her field at work. So the reason for that, it's not the qualification that's at risk here. It's a psychological wound that has to be healed. And I look forward to later on in the show when we're going to be talking about how to overcome this imposter syndrome, because I know there are people listening who are suffering from it in some form. And even if you don't have the full-blown imposter syndrome, I think a lot of us to some degree or another sometimes feel as if we are not fully suited for what we are doing. So it's going to be important that when we talk about those ways of overcoming the imposter syndrome, that listeners stay tuned to find out how they can overcome that. But you'd asked me about the effect on the professional life, and I wanted to talk about another effect. So another effect of people who have the imposter syndrome, because of the hypervigilance that they go about their work, they're often at odds with others in their workplace. If they're in a position of power, people below them find them to be very onerous. They put a lot of burden on people beneath them to make sure that they're dotting every I and crossing every T, and that every document has to be handed in exactly on time or the day before, and that it has to be done exactly a certain way. Whereas other bosses in the same company who don't have this sense of the imposter syndrome, their employees are a lot happier, has a lot more flexibility, and they are even more productive, because with more rules and with more burden, the employees beneath them often feel pressured and stressed and not able to rise to their full potential.
And that behavior, as we've talked about, is to compensate for some of those irrational fears of the manager and that fear of being found out. I'm wondering if you ever see the opposite sometimes too, especially in leadership positions, where people, because of feeling like they're not supposed to be there, they actually don't exercise power.
Absolutely.
And have a hard time giving direction to people because why should anyone listen to me? I have no idea what I'm talking about.
So that's the other extreme, right, of the reaction, where instead of using the power, they feel, I'm not a leader. No one is going to listen to me. And so when they need to make decisions as to people that needs to be disciplined or decisions that needs to be taken to move the organization further, they're stuck because they just feel, I can't make that decision. Who am I that I should make the decision? So there can be that inability to use power. So nevertheless, needless to say that all of these things that we have talked about so far helps to sabotage the person who is having the imposter syndrome. And so with this sabotaging, what usually happens after a while is that if people don't get help to overcome this syndrome, they end up acting as if they are the self-image that they really believe. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of people who statistics show that who win the lottery within 5 years of winning the lottery go right back to being broke. And the reason for this is that they have a self-image that say, I am not supposed to have abundance. I am not supposed to be prosperous. So even the fact that they won the lottery doesn't offset that image. So they end up sabotaging themselves, making crazy decisions, and end up broke. A lot of superstars, basketball players and musicians who have emotional wounding in their lives, they end up making millions. But as we know the story of a lot of these people, they make millions of dollars, and a lot of them end up right back to where they started. Why? Because the self-image has not been dealt with, and no amount of money can deal with that self-image. So next week we are going to look at how to deal with that negative self-concept. And just to give the first idea of what we are going to be talking about in next week's show, when we look more into it, that one of the first thing that needs to happen, we need to identify, a person needs to begin to identify what is it that has shaped your self-image that is making you feel that you are not suitable for that position.
And then looking through the strategies to tackle those things. I'm wondering too if next week we can talk a little bit about sort of the trajectory of someone in imposter syndrome. Does it vary in its course? Does it affect certain people more than others, genders more than others? Yes.
I think for a lot of what I see is that it tends to affect females, especially females within the corporate world, more than males. And part of that too is this thing that, I'm not supposed to be here. This is a male-dominated profession. Everyone else around me are males, and
they needed the token female.
I'm kind of the outsider. So even though a lot of these females are even more qualified than the men in their profession, they still feel as if somehow they don't need to be there. So next week we're going to be looking at 6 or 7 things to do that can help you to overcome that imposter imposter syndrome. And I think this is very, very important, because I think in a lot of our churches, there are people here who are sabotaging themselves because they have not dealt with the negative self-image. And Satan just has a field day when this happens, because if you have believers who are not living up to their potential, the kingdom of God is not being glorified. Unfortunately, we have to stop here for today.
I look forward to next week, Michael.
Okay, so until next time, this is your host, Michael Hart of Elim Counselling Services, praying that God would bless you in all your relationships and keep you sound in mind and pure in heart. And with me today was
Melissa Wagon.
Thank you very much for listening, and all the best until next time. Remember, you can reach us by going to 613-699-1677. Again, until next time, may God bless you in all your relationships and keep you sound in mind and pure in heart. Thank you very much for listening.